Welcome, everyone, to Hot Science at Home. We're so glad you can make it. UT Austin's Environmental Science Institute is proud to bring you the latest and coolest advancements in science through Hot Science at Home. Please join me in welcoming Professor Bob Duke, our special guest this evening. Welcome, Dr. Duke. How are you today?
Hi, Jay. I'm doing great. It's great to see you, and happy to be a part of this version of Hot Science Cool Talks. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us again. Bob is achieving new records. This is his fourth time over the 21 years of this program that he's joined us. Bob is a professor at UT's Butler School of Music. Many of you may know him through as one of the two guys on your head, which is one of my favorite podcasts. And I've known Bob for 30 years at the university and can share with you that he is one of the leading educators at the university and across the state. So we're very fortunate to have him tonight to talk to us about to err is human and learning and how we learn. So Bob, how does learning happen? Why don't you start us off there?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to even ask that question. I think this is something that we experience all the time, but we really don't ask, well, how is this actually happening that I'm learning to do things? And really, to put it succinctly, I mean, what learning is a process of forming and modifying memories. Really, if you think about anything that we can do, anything we're able to do physically or intellectually, perceptually, we do those things because of the memories that are in our heads, right? Our system of storing memories allows us to recall them, often advantageously, when we experience new things, and those memories help us navigate the experiences that we find ourselves in. Mm-hmm. One of the things I want to say about it, though, that's an important thing to consider, is that memories in organic brains are not like computer memories, which is often used as a metaphor for that you store something on your computer, the physical structure of the memory drive doesn't change, right? I mean, switches flip from 1 to 0 or 0 to 1 in some configuration that represents what you save, but the physical structure of the drive doesn't change. But in a physical brain, and I happen to have one right here, this is a model taken from an actual human brain, and this represents about the size and mass of what a typical human brain looks like in a typical adult. And in this thing are 86 billion, we now think, give or take, neurons, and that doesn't count the equal number or greater number of support cells and other structures that help those neurons work. And the actual physical configuration of those neurons and how they connect to one another is what learning is all about.
Mm-hmm. Right on.
I have a video that I'll show, actually that Dudet will show. It's very short. It's about a half a minute of a baby just behaving, and I think it's delightful. It'll be fun to watch. But I think it's a great example of how we human beings and other organisms as well, but certainly in our case, human beings, actually come to learn things. So Dudet, if you wouldn't mind playing that video, that'd be great.
That's delightful.
I probably watched that video 100 times. It delights me every time I see it. And I tell you, there are a lot of things that are cool about that, in addition to the fact that it's just a baby, and the baby's really cute and doing a lovely thing. But it illustrates something really important, and it has to do with the activity that the baby is engaged in. There's really not, at that point when we're watching that video, a clear goal that I'm going to use this thing to make a sound. The baby just happens to be noticing that when I throw this little measuring cup into this bowl, it kind of makes a sound, and I kind of throw it in a couple of times, and I drop it, and I go pick it up and throw it in. And somewhere, for reasons that we don't know, this baby decides to grab that thing by the handle and whack the bowl, and you see that delight that's vividly expressed by the baby in hearing that sound that results. And what's interesting about that is that reward and the signal in the brain for that reward makes it likely that that behavior will happen again. So really what brains are doing, what our brains are trying to do to help us survive is predict what's about to happen. And in fact, many people argue the whole reason to have a brain and a set of memories is to allow us to predict what's about to happen in the world. Because when we're better able to predict what's about to happen, we're better able to catch prey, we're better able to keep from becoming prey, we're better able perhaps to attract a mate. There are all kinds of things that we can do because the memories in our heads allow us to make predictions about what's about to happen in the world.
So in fact, you've described the brain as a prediction machine. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, when we are introduced to anything new, right, we recognize the fact that there are few things in life that are entirely new, right? I mean, we notice relationships between the things that we're sensing in the moment, either visually or auditorially or tactily or whatever, and stuff that we've experienced before. And what our brains very efficiently and with little effort on our part, below our conscious awareness, are calling up memories that might be associated with the things that we're experiencing in ways that help us make decisions about what to do, about how to act, about what's an advantageous action to take next. And the process of all of that requires something that is really an essential feature of learning, which is the title of our talk tonight, right? And that is doing things, and in the process of doing those things, making mistakes. And of course, one of the themes that we have, maybe the central theme of what we're talking about tonight, is why mistake making is such an important part of developing memories that are advantageously retrievable in ways that help us navigate the world.
So that makes me think of when I play ultimate frisbee, I make dozens of practice throws beforehand at different angles and distances, some successful, some not. When the game starts, how does my brain use those memories of those throws?
Well, that's a great question. And really, when you think about it, right, we're recording relationships between actions that we take and what comes about in the world around us. Right? Now, if I'm doing something so consistently that every time I do the thing, whatever that is, the same thing results from my doing that thing, well, there's not much to learn from that, right? Because I'm just kind of doing the same thing over and over again. But if there's some variation in what I do, even variations that are happening below my conscious awareness, but my brain can recognize them, well, then my brain is learning relationships between maybe the way I'm holding the frisbee or how much force I put when I make my throw or where my eyes are pointed when I make my throw. And all those kinds of things are getting recorded unconsciously in ways that then allow us to recall memories that increase more accurate throws in the future, perhaps, right? Or being able to, get a frisbee past a defender. I don't play ultimate frisbee, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But I mean, those kinds of things, because of the variations in the things that we do, and those variations include what we would think of as errors or mistakes.
Oh, right on. Okay, I've got renewed dedication to this sport.
As you should, absolutely, yeah.
So part of your thesis is that learning in a traditional classroom environment is not really ideal. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think, one of the things that happens when you try to systematize learning for groups of people is we make a lot of compromises. I understand, having been a public school teacher myself, I understand the attractiveness of orderliness. And, when you have a bunch of disparate people who are in a room who have different motivations and different capacities and different histories and all those kinds of things, to get them all through a learning experience together, it's understandable that what we teachers try to do is structure things in such a way that we know we can move pretty predictably from the first step to the second step to the third step to the fourth step and get to the right answer, whatever the right answer is. So in a lot of what we do in school, and this is not just in primary and secondary school, this is in universities as well, is we do a lot of telling and showing with the idea in mind that what we expect students to do is remember and imitate what they've been told and shown, and that thereby they will, come to understand what they're doing. But what's interesting to consider is that it's possible to teach someone to be competent without their really understanding what it is that they're doing. And the limitation of that is important because it limits the extent to which a learner herself or himself can actually apply what they learn in new situations if they don't really understand what it is that they're doing. And I have an example, if you'll indulge me,
Sure.
to show this. That's something that we've all experienced in school before. So I'm going to put up this slide that has a math problem here about dividing by a fraction. And I'm sure everybody who's listening tonight, can recognize this as something that we all experienced when we were in the upper elementary grades and beyond, right? And often, if I'm giving a talk to a live audience, I'll ask people to solve for X and give people a few minutes, or not a few minutes, but a few seconds to think about it. And then I invite people to raise their hands and volunteer an answer. And what's always striking to me is no matter who's in the audience, even a room full of university faculty, almost nobody raises their hand. And I know that many people who are probably watching right now know the answer to this. So I'm going to invite people in the chat right now. If you know the answer, go ahead and type the answer into the chat. And many people do know this, and often though, again, in a live audience, when you're actually having to do it in person and you are revealing what you do and don't understand, many people, because of what they've learned in school, are very reticent to volunteer and openly offer an answer, even when they actually know what the answer is. And I'm looking in the chat, many people, they have this, it's 1.5 or 6/4 or 3/2, depending on how you reduce it. Now, the thing I'd like you to ask you to invite you to put in the chat now is how you got to that. And so let me just, actually, I'm not going to ask you to put that in the chat. I'm just going to do it. So what many people do when I ask them to do this, they do this with their hands. It's sort of the universal gesture of solving this thing, and what they're saying is, I flip this thing over, right? Which is this term in the equation is called the divisor, by the way. I invert the divisor, then I multiply across, and I get 6/4. And when I do see a fraction, I get 1/1.5. Now, the question I would ask now of everybody, now you can put in the chat, is why do you flip the divisor? Why do you invert that thing? What's that about? Why do you do that? And I'll just give a second. Somebody has the word cross multiply. Yeah, that's what people call that when they're doing that, right? But why? Why do we do that? And I see some good responses coming up.
Yeah, lots of good responses.
I want to suggest to you that most people have no idea why you flip that thing over. The best response I ever got, I was in a room full of fifth graders once, and I had a problem like this up on the board. And I said, somebody raise your hand and tell me why you invert the divisor. And this kid raised his hand and said, because if you don't get it wrong, what better reason does one need to do something than that, right? But yet, if the goal of a teacher or a school system or a society is to get rooms full of disparate learners to all get the right answer to that equation and be able to know what X is, one way to do that is to print out pieces of paper with lots of problems that look just like that on it with different numbers in them and teach everybody to go invert and multiply, invert and multiply, invert and multiply. And you'll get everybody getting the right answer with no commensurate requirement that anybody understands what the hell they're doing. But they're all getting the right answer. And this is a real important thing that I think about whenever I have a chance to talk to teachers. I say this a lot. The right answer is a poor indicator of understanding. It's just the right answer. And many people who don't know why you do that, who wrote things like that's the rule and that's why I put this thing over, have now a personal experience that shows, yes, I know how to get the right answer, but I don't really understand what it is that I'm doing, which is a huge thing when you think about it.
Right. So it's all about drill and kill is so much of the way that learning happens in classrooms or does not happen optimally.
Yeah.
What you're saying.
Well, and I want to say that teachers who follow this approach, this is not to, diss them. I mean,
Sure.
They have the best of intentions, right? Because students, we don't want our students to be discouraged, right? We don't want them to feel like they're not capable of doing this. So we think, well, the way to make that, have them feel more capable is to set them up so carefully by showing them step by step exactly what they need to do that they'll be able to get to the correct answer. But there's a downside to that, right? Is that first of all, you, as I said now 3 times, you can get the right answer and not know what you're doing. But the more important thing is that there's no opportunity for students to experience not understanding something and yet continuing to work through it without becoming overly discouraged, to the point that they can get to the answer and they get to the point where they're actually able to come up with the answer because of something that they figured out on their own. And if you think about it, we human beings forget almost everything that we experience. If you try to recall yesterday and you say, okay, so can I just recall every minute that happened yet? I have no idea. I know I ate breakfast, I talked to my wife, I took my dog for a walk, vaguely I understand some stuff, but I remember some stuff, but I don't remember the details of all of that. That's not a bug in memory. That's a feature, right? There's no reason, because it's so biologically expensive to form a memory and update a memory. Wouldn't make any sense to record everything that happened to us every day. So the question then becomes, well, what cues the brain that this is something that it should spend the biological energy to record and make a memory? And here's the thing, one big part of that is mistake making, is having an intention, that is, you're trying to accomplish some goal, or you're trying to figure something out, or you're trying to make something happen, and it doesn't happen at all, or it doesn't happen quite the way you expect. And the discrepancy between your expectation and your intention and what actually comes about, that's a signal to your brain that this memory needs to be updated. And without that error signal, that updating is generally not going to happen, right? As you were talking about your Frisbee throwing, right? All of those slight variations in your Frisbee throwing, some of which cause huge errors, some of which cause slighter errors, all that stuff is getting recorded in a way that optimizes your ability to control your physical body to do the things that you want to have happen. And the same thing is true for intellectual skill, or many intellectual skills as well.
So it's really having the opportunity to struggle. That's one of the real keys to learning.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing about that's a really, I think, important thing to consider is that what that requires on the part of a learner is patience. And we sort of presume wrongly that however patient you are as a person, that's some baked in thing, and kids are impatient and forget it. Actually, we can nurture patience, right? And I think anybody who doesn't think kids can be patient with struggle has never watched a kid learn a video game. With no instruction from an adult, nobody's giving them a lesson plan, nobody's doing anything. They're just fooling around trying to make something happen and learning from the mistakes they're making. So many children who we say are impatient or won't persist at a task if they can't get it right away, like I said, haven't watched kids play a video game. But if you think back to that video with the baby, you thought if we took that experience and put it in school and we had a lesson plan, we'd have a bowl, we talk about the bowl and the shape of the bowl and whatever, and then we take the measuring cup and we'd say, this is how you hold it, you put your hand here and you do this thing, and we would totally screw up the experience. But again, with the best of intentions. It's not because we're trying to short circuit this really important thing. It's just that there's an emotional part, that thing, right, the patience part, that has to happen in order for somebody to persist when they don't get it right away. Right
on. So you have another activity for us to try.
I do, and this is something that I'd like people not to write the answer in the chat. I'd like you to keep it to yourself. So I'm going to, in a minute, put up another slide that has a puzzle on it. And I'd like you all to take a minute. I'm only going to take a minute of time to try and solve this puzzle. Don't Google it. What I'd like you to do is just puzzle over it a little bit, no pun intended, and see if you can figure out the answer to this little thing that I'm about to show you. So let me show you the picture now. And here's the scenario. I have 9 identical 2-inch cubes. They look alike, they feel alike, there's no way to distinguish them one from another. And in one of those 9 cubes is a wadded up $100 bill. And in the other 9-inch cubes are wadded up piece of paper the size of a $100 bill, but they're just blank piece of paper. They're not worth anything. And in my hypothetical situation here, if you can find the cube that has a $100 bill, you get to keep the $100 bill, hypothetically. Okay. So you might say, well, Bob, how can I find it? I mean, the cubes are sealed, the stuff's wadded up inside. How are you going to find it? Well, here's a hint. The paper that the $100 bill is written on is just slightly heavier than the blank pieces of paper. But the difference is so slight that your motor system can't detect it. So if I have a $100 bill cube in this hand and a blank piece of paper cube in this hand, I couldn't tell it by feel. So to help you solve the problem, I'm going to give you a balance scale, which many of you have seen balance scales like this. They don't have any numbers on them. They just tell you which side of the scale has more mass on it. And what I'm going to invite you to do is use this scale to find the $100 bill. But here's what makes it a puzzle. You can only use the scale twice. So you can put something on the scale and see what happens. You can put some other stuff on the scale, see what happens, but that's it. Then you're done with the scale, right? So what I'd like to invite you to do now is to take about a minute, and I'll time it here, and see if you can figure out in 2 uses of the scale how you can determine which cube has a $100 bill. Remember, the paper with the $100 bill is printed on just a little bit heavier than the blank pieces of paper. But here's the thing. Like I said, don't Google it. Don't let anybody tell you how to do it. Just muddle over that for a minute. And I'll let a minute go by and be silent, uncharacteristically for me, while you figure that out. So the minute starts right now. Again, don't write anything in the chat. Just see if you can figure it out.
Or perhaps if you do figure it out, you could put in the chat, I got it. Let us know if you've got it.
But don't tell us what the answer is.
But don't tell us the answer. Someone got it.
And I just want to assure everybody, this isn't a trick. You can determine to a certainty where the $100 bill is in 2 uses of the scale. Okay, it's been about a minute. Now, like I said, whenever I do this with a live audience, I can tell you that if you didn't figure this out and you tried to figure it out, you really want to know the answer right now. And if you did figure it out, or even if this is a problem you've seen before, and you really want to tell somebody who hasn't figured it out yet what the answer is.
Right.
And what I'm going to ask both groups of people to do is don't do that. If you didn't figure it out yet, just wait. Just let yourself think about this later and enjoy what's likely to come from it if you do actually figure it out. And if you did figure it out, don't wreck it for somebody who hasn't by telling them the answer. Let that muddle go on. And I'll just tell you just 2 quick stories about this problem. So about 10 years ago, I was giving a talk for all the new teachers in Austin Independent School District, and down at Crockett High School or something in a big auditorium. I had this slide up there. I'm getting ready to go on to my next slide, and this teacher raised her hand, and she said, "What's the answer to the cube problem?" I said, "I'm not going to tell you." She was pissed. It was like, "What do you mean? This is school. You give me a problem, and I work on it a little bit, and then I can't do it. You explain it to me, But that's who decided that's the way school should be, right? But it's indicative of the lack of patience. Because think about it for a minute. For those of you who say, look, I've spent a minute on this, I'm done. You spent a minute. God, it's maybe a little more time. You get it. And I'll just say one other story about this. So I was giving a talk at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and it was a learning conference or something, and I was the first talk in the morning, and I had this slide, and I showed this problem, and I didn't get the answer. And at the end of the day, at the wine and cheese reception, which was very nice and very classy, these 4 graduate students walk up to me, a male and 3 females, and the guy says, "Okay, what's the answer to the cube problem?" I said, "I'm not going to tell you." He said, "Look, man, I haven't heard a damn thing anybody said all day. I've just been trying to figure out this problem. Just tell me what's the cube problem." I said, "Look, I'm not going to tell you, but I'll ask you some questions about it." I said, "Well, what if you just put put one cube on each side. What would you find? He said, well, that's stupid. There's still 7 cubes. I said, I know, but just tell me what could you learn from that? And before I could ask him the second question, one of his classmates, who I later learned her name was Gemma, lovely Scottish name, Gemma goes, I got it. Now, I couldn't give her that.
Right.
No lucid explanation from a teacher can do that for a learner, right? But you have to cultivate the patience and strategically set the problems that are well matched to the level of patience that you anticipate your students are willing to invest in solving them, right? I mean, that's the challenge for all of us who teach.
Absolutely. Yeah, great example. So in your example, you admonished everyone not to use Google. So if you think about it, on one hand, Google can be considered, or the internet, one of the greatest boons to learning in the history of civilization. But at the same time, it also serves to inhibit that struggling and muddling that's so important to learning, doesn't it?
Yeah, and not only that, one of the things that I alluded to earlier is how much work our brains are doing below our conscious awareness. I mean, drawing associations between things that are in our memories and actually figuring things out. I mean, many of us who like puzzles, if you like crossword puzzles, and you go to bed at night, you got this one thing you can't figure out what the clue, you can't figure out what the answer is, this one thing in a crossword puzzle. You wake up the next morning, it's right there, it's so obvious, it hits you in the face. You go, what happened? I haven't looked at this since I went to bed. Well, your brain kept thinking about it, even though you weren't consciously thinking about it. Now, that's something about why Google is disadvantageous, right? I mean, when I was a kid, we used to have to memorize a lot of stuff in school. I mean, memorization was just what we did, And you think, well, why do that? Why memorize anything when you've got a phone that connects you to the universe? For goodness sake, why would you do that? And here's the reason why. Because stuff that's in your memory is, first of all, more readily accessible by your brain, right? So if I'm Googling something, I have to read it. Some of my working memory is taken up by actually getting this now into my head versus something that I've memorized that's already in there. And my brain is able to make connections among the things that are in my head that it can't make between something that's in my head and something that I've just looked up in Google. I mean, it will do it once I look it up, but I mean, what I've obviated is the opportunity for my brain to learn relationships among things that are in its memory that can only happen once the stuff is in there.
Right on. So to try to come to some closure or conclusion on this, how can teachers, educators create learning experiences in school or universities that really foster this kind of patience with struggling that lead to optimal learning?
Great. That's a great prompt. Thanks for that softball. So here we go. I'm going to show you what I think is a great metaphor for learning experiences. I got 2 pictures of kids on bicycles here with training wheels. And if you look closely at this image over here on the left, this girl in the pink shirt, you'll notice the training wheels are set incorrectly. The bicycle, rear wheel of the bike, and both training wheels are all touching the ground right now. Now, this child can't possibly learn anything about balancing on a bicycle from this bicycle because the training wheels are keeping her upright. So what they're doing is they're obviating any balance errors that she's likely to make. So as short of her hurling herself over to one side of the bicycle and throwing the bike on the ground, she's not going to fall over because the training wheels are going to keep her from falling over. And this is just like the process of teaching somebody to invert and multiply and get the right answer, right? You almost can't not get the right answer, right? So you've obviated error in that instance. This bike over on this side, this little training wheel here is about 4 inches off the ground. So this guy, I don't know if it's a guy or girl, but whatever, this bike is set up so when he shifts his center of gravity from one side to another, the bike is going to move, right? So he can make a balance error and the bicycle will move, but the training wheels will keep him from making a catastrophic error. And I think that's something that we as teachers ought to think of ourselves as doing, right? We're able to set up situations where learners can experience strategic errors, but we avoid their making catastrophic errors, right? And that bicycle allows that kid to do that. But even with these 2 examples, when you're been in the world living as, as a 6 or 7-year-old or 5-year-old, and you've always been with your feet planted on the ground, and suddenly you get on a bicycle with training wheels and your feet are in the air, and that's kind of a weird thing. So I'm going to show you one more kind of bike here, and I invite everybody to look at this picture here. And whoops, I don't know what I just did, but let me see if I can fix it. I think I just clicked too many buttons here. Hold on. Okay. Well, maybe I can't get back to that. I'm not sure.
Well,
okay. Well, anyway, what I was going to do, I seem like somebody's. I look like I'm frozen or Jay's frozen.
You're unfrozen now. We can hear you. And
Are you back, Jay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that little blip, folks. So if you look at this image, what do you notice about this bicycle? I mean, those of you who have little kids at home now recognize this right away. Other than the fact that the streamers are awesome, is there no pedals on that bike, right? So now the training wheels on this bike is this little girl's feet. Now this is a really optimal learning experience, because now we're exploiting all of that this kid has learned to do over the course of her lifetime about balancing and controlling her body, right? Because she knows how to walk and balance on her feet. She can run and balance on her feet. And now we're going to ask her to do that sitting on a bicycle seat, right? And holding on to these handlebars. So now when she experiences a balance error, her feet can easily keep her upright on the bike. And for those of you who've seen little kids on bicycles like this, what's remarkable about it is, without any real much guidance from an adult, how quickly a kid will get going fast enough that they'll pick up their feet and glide for a few feet or a few yards without any instruction at all. Because again, what the bicycle is doing is allowing them to use stuff they already know how to do, which is balance on their feet, and now be able to use that while they're controlling this new device that they're sitting on and steering. So I think optimal learning experiences look like that, right? There's room for mistake making, but you're protected from catastrophic mistake making. And all of us who have lived a long life know that we've often not been protected from catastrophic mistake making, which is too bad. But for learners, for them to come to recognize that, when I reach a block, I reach a difficulty, and I persist through it, and I'm able to poke through and get to the other side, that experience, that feeling is so powerful for any human being, because what it convinces you is, I have agency as a learner, right? There are things that when I'm confronted with something that's unfamiliar or puzzling, or I don't quite know what to do, if I stick with it and go for it a little bit, I'll get to a satisfying conclusion. And developing a history of that over time in school creates a totally different kind of learner, right? So all the kids who are able to persist with video games, who we say this kid is unmotivated and impatient and ever, we know that it's not the kid, right? We know that if we create different kinds of experiences, that we will create different kinds of learners, right? And their view of what it means to learn in school will be more like that little baby learning to whack on the mixing bowl with the measuring cup, right? And more like the kids who we see on video games, and more like these kids that we see on bicycles. And as Jay knows, I could go on and on and on and on and on, but I won't, because I think we're almost at the time it's time for Q&A. So I'll stop.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing those insights, Bob. And yeah, we're ready for Q&A. Please submit your questions for Bob. We'll be happy to answer them. And remember, when it comes to mistake making, doesn't apply to submitting questions. There are no bad questions. All right. So let's, as we go through the questions here, let's see. I think the first one comes from Joe Virgil. And Joe asks, generally speaking, how long can a memory of errors stay active in a way that we can continue to learn from it?
That's a great question, Joe. Well, there are a couple things to think about, right? And that is how much the error matters. I mean, we make little mistakes all the time. I mean, even if I'm reaching down to pick up my teacup that's sitting on my desk here, actually it's a mug, it's not a cup. I have an expectation about what my hand is supposed to do and what the cup's supposed to feel like when I get there, but I don't hit it right at the same place every time, and I'm making adjustments in this all the time. So the slight errors, and let me just take a minute to say specifically what I mean by error, what I'm including in the definition of error, is any discrepancy between what I expect or intend and what actually comes about. So it isn't just a gross mistake, like I got the completely wrong answer, or I fell over because I wasn't balanced correctly. But I mean, anything that's discrepant, like Jay's frisbee throwing, between what one intends and what one expects and what actually comes about, that's why I'm saying an error. So the things that are noticeable to a learner are getting recorded all the time. The reason practice, whether you're playing a musical instrument or learning to bat in baseball or whatever the thing happens to be, the reason that practice is useful, right, is that you need to revisit the same activity iteratively in a way that's going to create enough mistake making that you're going to persist. Your brain will allow those memories to persist long enough that you can make an adjustment in the memory.
Great, thanks. Our next question is from Jennifer, and she asks, as a teacher, how do we assess in terms of grading and formative assessment when we are trained to look for the quote unquote right answer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would tell you, part of it is defining what the right answer is. We usually think of the right answer as the finished product, right? So for that dividing by a fraction thing, it's the number. But we can decide that the right answer isn't that the right answer is actually explaining the process of dividing by a fraction, or explaining the process of some chemical reaction that we're talking about, or whatever. So the thing you get credit for isn't just the right answer, right? Now, I know for every teacher in Texas and any other state who has something akin to a STAR test is saying right now, easy for you to say, college professor, old man, but I get that. But the thing that I think there's a lot of evidence to support is that if you teach people in ways that helps them to understand what they're doing, so the goal isn't just the right answer. The fact that they understand will get them to the right answer. That will be a byproduct of the understanding. But the reverse isn't true, right? You can get the right answer and not understand. But if you understand, you're pretty sure you're going to get the right answer. So if you have to make a change from that, is to get to the point where you actually make the goal for learners not the right answer, but explaining how they thought about this in a way that got them to whatever answer they came to.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thanks for that. And thanks for that great question. Joe has another question here. One of my favorite quotes from Stoic philosophy is, quote, "The obstacle is the way," end quote. This sounds a lot like what you're talking about, right?
Well, it is. I think, I'm not really conversant in Stoic philosophy, but I like that phrase, the obstacle is the way, because, if you think about it, if all we had to do was, want something and it just appeared and we got it without any effort, I'm talking about physical things, emotional things, intellectual things, whatever, it'd be pretty boring. I think what makes life interesting is having goals that we either set for ourselves or set by other people or set by our environment that we then pursue and often accomplish, right? And that's the joy of it, is that there are things that we find, wow, I'm able to do that, and what I think a teacher can do for a kid that is a great gift is to convince a kid that she or he has agency, right? Is that you don't need me. As a teacher, yeah, I can help you sometimes and I can create some experiences for you, but you are so capable of doing so much on your own. And it's understandable that caring teachers often overhelp, right? Is that we want somebody to get to a satisfying conclusion because somebody, whether it's us or somebody else, has defined a satisfying conclusion as the right answer. So we think, well, I'm going to systematically show you how to get there so you just don't feel bad at all, right? And when I mean feel bad, I mean I'm just frustrated because the thing that I want hasn't happened yet. And everybody I know who's happy and successful has found ways of dealing with the emotion that comes with the things that I want haven't happened yet. But I'm willing to persist in pursuing them.
Which leads to a really good question from Bruce, who's asking, what are the best strategies? What are some good strategies for making it safe to fail?
Well, Bruce, if I can offer one thing about your question, and that's the word fail. You notice I don't use that word only because it just seems to have too much drama in it. You know what I mean? I just made a mistake. If you get an answer wrong on a test, you haven't failed, you made a mistake. So I think part of what we can do is change our language in a way that makes mistakes, puts them in perspective about what they are. I know many children. I know you all who are teachers who are on this call tonight know many students who are just very anxious and just go to pieces with mistake making. And one of the things that we have to do is desensitize them to that. And one of the ways of doing that, and this gets related to a question that someone asked a while ago, it might have been Joe, is not making the right answer the ultimate thing, right? I mean, making one's explanation of it the ultimate thing, even if your explanation might have mistakes in it, might have errors in it. Now, you might think, well, I don't know, how do you convince kids of that? Well, I think pointing out all of the experiences that we human beings have, including our students, where they are, like I said, where it's learning to play a game with their friends, learning the words to a pop song that they like, or whatever, they're doing all of that, and there is a lot of mistake making inherent in all of that they don't notice, I would submit. And then one of the things that we can help them do is to notice how mistake making actually helps them learn what it is that they're doing. So I don't know what we want to do next, but I'll leave it to you guys to decide where we're going here.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I think we got time for one more question. I think Vincent has a really apropos last question. How did a professor in the School of Music become so knowledgeable about psychology?
Well, I consider myself a psychologist. I think, when I was a kid, I was really curious. As I still am as an aging adult. And one of the things that I think, studying music and teaching music sort of externalized a lot about how learning actually works. If you think about learning mathematics or learning to understand some scientific principles and those kind of things, a lot of the actual learning is covert. It's not, you're not actually doing something that's outwardly observable, But when you're learning to play an instrument or sing and, you're seeing moment to moment what's happening to your progress or lack of progress, there's a vividness to that I think reveals a lot about learning. And I don't, that's a post hoc explanation that may be BS. That's really not why I know this stuff. But I think it's interesting that so much of what we do when we see people learning things that are observable outwardly, right? We're not just looking at what's going on in somebody's head. Mm-hmm. We see much of the moment to moment progress, struggle, hurdles, overcoming hurdles, those kinds of things that we don't see with some covert things like, learning about some mathematical principle or whatever.
Well, outstanding. And thanks so much for taking time with us tonight. And everybody, let's please join me in thanking Dr. Duke. And you can find out more information about his work and watch his full talk through our Hot Science Cool Talk archives. And also Two Guys on Your Head, the podcast is available on through any podcast app you have. Just type Two Guys into the search, and you'll come up with that, a very worthwhile podcast. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everybody.